friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making an interactive Give It a Whirl card using Just Plain Awesome and Magic Messages from Lawn Fawn. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my mice, and they're all going to be little brown mice today. So I decided to go with the E50s. I'm using E50, E51, E53, and E55, but it is mainly just the darkest three shades on the majority of the body. So I'm starting with that E55 and laying in some shadow down the back of their body, and then blending out with the E53 and then using the E51 for a highlight. And then I used a touch of that E50 on the belly and the feet. And then I also left a little bit of white on their muzzles. I just thought that would give them a little extra character and cuteness. So I colored all of the mice the same. Like I said, I wanted them to look like they were all part of a little family. So I just switched my shadows around depending on the direction that they were facing. I like to keep the shadows down the back, that way the highlight is on the face where all of those adorable features are, so you can see them very clearly. So I'll continue on coloring with the Mama Mouse, which is going to be this one here. It could be whatever you want it to be, but it's going to be the mama in the little story that I'm trying to tell in this scene. So I colored her the same, like I said, and then the baby is the only one that I did a bit differently. I just went down a shade to make him a little bit lighter. So I started with the E53 for him, blended out with the E51, and used the E50 for the highlight. Then I'm going to give them all some rosy cheeks, also color in their noses and the insides of their ears using R11 and R20. So a little R20 first. I'm also filling in the noses with the R20 and then blending out the cheeks and the ears with the R11. And then I'm going to add in the R000 and color in one of these little pieces of paper here. Instead of just going with plain white paper airplanes, I thought it would be fun if these little mice were using some colored cardstock. So that's what I'm going to do. And I also did color the mom's scarf in this pink combo. I did accidentally color in a tiny sliver behind her, also pink, but I'll fix that later on when I realize that it's actually part of the airplane. Then I'm going to darken up this combo just slightly by taking away the R000 and adding in R22. And I'll do another of the paper airplanes, just adding those shadows where the folds would be. So the parts that would be farthest away from the light are going to have the deepest shadow, and then the parts like the edges of the wings or just the corners of the folds are going to have the highlight. And then while I have this combo out, I'm also going to do one more of the little airplanes. So one of these will be on the before version of the Give It a Whirl, and the other one will be on the after version. But we'll get into all of that later on. I'm going to move on to an orange combo. I am doing kind of like a pastel rainbow theme for the color palette. So I have YR01, YR02, and YR04. And I colored in the piece of paper that little mouse is folding. Then I'm going to move to yellows, and I'm using Y000, Y02, and Y06. And I'll use that for the other sheet of unfolded paper, and then I'm also going to do one of the paper airplanes. So for the color palette that I was going with, I had more planes than enough to do one of each color, so I'm going to double up on a couple of the colors. Next up is going to be green, and I'm going to go with a cool toned green. So I'm using G00, G02, and G03. So always placing those darkest shadows in the parts that are creased or folded, so that's where the G03 went. then blending out with the G02 and then using the G00 for highlight. I did go back on that one and add some extra G03 in that deepest crease. And then I also colored in the scarf for the other little mouse that is flying one of the airplanes. Then I'm going to move on to a blue-green. I'm going to use BG10, BG53, and BG57. I'm going to do the paper airplane that the other mouse is holding above his head, getting ready to launch into the air and create this swirling rainbow in the sky. So I started with the BG57, blended out with the BG53, and used the BG10 for the highlight. And then for the little goggles, I used BG53, blended out with BG10. Then I'm going to move on to more of like an indigo blue. I'm using B41, B52, and B45. So B45 for the creases on that one, blended out with the B52, and then I'll use the B41 for the highlight. My last combo is going to be purple. I'm using BV01, BV02, and BV04, and I'm going to do both of the remaining paper airplanes. So the super tiny one and also the larger one that the mama and baby are riding in. So I'm doing my shadows right around the edge where they are sitting. I also colored in that little section behind her back that I had accidentally colored pink earlier on, but since it was a darker color, it just went right over it very easily. Blended out with the BV02 and then used the BV01 for a highlight on the edge of the wings. Then I took a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side, and I'm going to go over the eyes of my mice that have their eyes open just to make them bright and shiny again, and then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. So for my background, I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and then I've also cut out 3 little parts of my Give It a Whirl. I've got the Give It a Whirl scalloped add-on, and then 2 of the regular Give It a Whirl, the smaller circle. I'm going to set one of those aside, and then the other one I'm going to ink blend on. I'm going to use some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink and the Cloudy Stencil from Lawn Fawn to create a cloudy sky. So I'm just adding that ink on and pressing down more firmly as I leave that stencil, and then using softer pressure as I go up, so it gives it a very soft, dreamy look. And then I'm just turning that stencil so that I get a different cloud formation and working my way down that panel. And if I need to, I can also flip that stencil over to the opposite side and get 4 more different orientations. So that's what I did for that final one there. So I did 4 of the clouds on the main focal panel. And then I'm going to add a little extra ink down at the bottom so it's also kind of hazy looking. And then I'm going to set that one aside. Then I'm going to take the Give It a Whirl scalloped add-on, and I'm going to take the Give It a Whirl template. I'm going to add some removable adhesive. I'm just using tape runner adhesive to the back of that stencil so it'll be nice and sticky. And then I'm going to line it up over the Give It a Whirl scalloped add-on die cut. Make sure it's on there nice and straight, and then I'll smooth that down into place. And that's going to maintain that white scalloped edge. So you don't have to do that if you don't want it to be white. But I liked the white because it kind of breaks up the clouds a bit. So if your clouds aren't lined up perfectly, nobody's going to notice because you have that white scalloped edge that visually breaks up the clouds anyway. I will try to use the same cloud formation on the same side as I did for the main panel. So I've got that main panel off to my right hand side so I can see which one I used, and I'm trying to mimic that as best as I can, but it's not going to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be because we have that white edge. So once I'm done with that one, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to leave that template on it for now. and move on to one of my smaller Give It a Whirl circles. And again, I'm just copying the same cloud formation so that it's all as close to matching up as possible. But I'm not going to stress too much if it isn't perfect. After all, this is a handmade card, and I think when people get these interactive cards especially, like there's just so much other stuff going on that nobody's going to notice if everything isn't lined up perfectly. So now that I have all of my cloudy parts done, I'm going to go back to my focal panel and I'm going to use the Slimline Grassy stencil to add some ground at the bottom. And I decided to go for more of like the cool toned green to match the coloring. So I'm going to bring in some cracked pistachio for that. And then to warm it up just slightly, I will also add in a little bit of mowed lawn. So I'm adding the mowed lawn at the top to just really make that grass stand out, and then going back to the cracked pistachio to blend everything back together. And then I will just set these panels aside to dry for now. And I'm going to move on to my stamping. So I'm working on what is going to be the outer part, or the part one of my Give It a Whirl. So I lined up my sentiment, and I also used 2 of the little airplane die cuts to figure out where I wanted my airplane trails to go. And then I'm going to stamp all of that using some Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, which is the same ink that I used to stamp my colored images at the beginning, because I do want to color in the word big and also that extra little airplane that is right there on the sentiment. I decided to go with that sending big hugs sentiment because it just tied in so well with the Just Plain Awesome stamp set because of that paper airplane. So I stamped that down a couple of times to make sure it was nice and bright, and then I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to pop my scalloped Give It a Whirl add-on in next so that I can stamp my airplane trails on that one. And I kept my template on there still because I want to make sure that I'm stamping those trails within the lines of the area that is, I want to leave that outer part white. So now I can peel off that template and you can see how that's looking. And then I also trimmed down the background piece with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to add a couple more of those airplane trails in the top, left, and bottom right corners. Then I can pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock and stamping in Merman ink, which is just a slightly more green toned ink. But I really, really like it. So I'm stamping the last little mouse with his airplane and another trail and the You're Just Plain Awesome sentiment. So now I am ready to start decorating the 2 parts of my Give It a Whirl mechanism. So I've got the scalloped one, which is going to be the part 2 kind of, and then I've got the smaller one, which is going to be the front. So I've got my 2 mice that are flying the paper airplanes on the scalloped piece, and then on the smaller one, I'm just going to add 2 of the small airplanes. So I'm just choosing 2 of those and adding those right in front of the little trails. So it looks like they are flying through the sky. And I'm adhering all of those down with the glue tube. Then I'm going to color in that extra paper airplane. I'm going to use the orange shades for that, and also the word big. Now, it's not really recommended to color with Copic markers or alcohol markers over Distress Oxide inks, but I really wanted those to be more visible, so I decided to do it for this. Technically, I probably should have also stamped and colored those 2 paper airplanes directly onto that panel because it would make the mechanism move a little bit more smoothly, but I was nervous about doing all of that coloring over the Distress Oxide inks, so I decided to do the die cuts. So now I'm ready to assemble the Give It a Whirl mechanism. So first I'm going to take that connector piece, which I die cut out of some very thin paper. I actually just used the leftover bottom of my to-do list from yesterday because it's a very thin paper, like a copy paper. So I folded that in half and I am adhering that with a permanent dot roller adhesive on one side. And then just if any extra of that adhesive gets where I don't want it, I can just rub it away. So I am attaching that to that second plain white circle that I die cut and set aside earlier. I also trimmed out the little handle out of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock as well, since it is a nice heavy weight. And I'm adding adhesive just on the lower part that is going to fit inside this mechanism. So I'm just opening that up and adding that little tab into the lower half so that it's sticking out the cut edge. And then so that the recipient knows what to do when they get this card, I also die cut that little cover piece out of some mermaid cardstock to match the card base and just adhered that right over top. Then I'm going to flip these two pieces over and feed the front part of that mechanism through using the tab. Because I have the two layers of die cuts, it is going to be a little bit trickier to train that paper to flow more naturally, but after I played with this a few times, it started to go really easily. So next I'm going to take some thin adhesive strips and I am going to line that up right on top of the stitching line that is left behind by that Give It a Whirl scalloped add-on. I like to take the release papers completely off of both sides of that adhesive. I find it's just much easier to manipulate and get it to curve more nicely. So you want this to be just around the outer rim of the smaller area of that Give It a Whirl mechanism, but you don't want it to be touching. So that's why I'm just going right on top of that stitching detail, and I used 2.5 pieces to go all the way around. Then I can line up the mechanism on my focal panel. I'm just making sure that it is closed all the way so that I can see that it is nice and straight before I press that down into place. Before I add the focal panel to my card front, I did want to pull in just a little bit of pattern paper to tie in the color palette. So I'm taking something from the Rainbow Ever After 6x6. I decided to go with this kind of dash line paper. I thought it kind of went along with the dash lines of the paper airplane trails. So I just trimmed that down to cover the entire card front and made sure that it was on there nice and straight. It is an A2 standard size cards, 4¼ wide by 5½ tall. And then I can glue my focal panel on top of that. So now I'm ready to decorate the outer rim of my card front. So I'm going to take the little mouse with the airplane over his head and add him down to the lower left corner. He fit just perfectly down there. And then I will add the little mouse with her paper as she is folding up more paper airplanes. I'll put that over at the bottom right. I'll add another paper airplane to one of the trails. The little paper airplane is going to go right next to the folded paper as if that little mouse is still in the process of making them. And then the last paper airplane will go at the top left. And that is going to finish up this card. I will lift it up so you can see all of that detail and give you another peek at the inside and also show you how that mechanism is working. Like I said, the more you play with it, the smoother it starts to glide. So I just have to keep playing with it a few more times, but it's working much better now. So really, really happy with how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and hit that like button, and you can leave me a comment down below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you'd like to watch it again, this video will also be up on the Lawn Fawn blog and YouTube channel today. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you may also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Thanks so much again. Bye-bye.